I want you to take a deep breath. Right now, like wherever you are listening to this, just breathe in.
Yeah, literally just take a second and take a breath.
Because if you are sitting in your living room or, standing in your kitchen, there is this illusion we all completely buy into.
Oh, absolutely.
You walk inside, you shut the front door, you hear that heavy click of the deadbolt, and you think you sealed yourself off from the outside world. You think you're standing inside this sterile, static box.
Right. A safe little bubble.
Exactly. But the reality, your home is constantly breathing, it is exhaling, and it's inhaling moisture, soil gases, pollutants, and just a remarkably complex ecosystem of microscopic life.
It is entirely dynamic.
It really is. And, ever wonder why your home feels damp, musty, or maybe just harder to cool than it actually should be? What if the real problem is hiding right under your feet and, well, you're being overcharged to fix it?
That is the big question right now.
Because today we are exposing the biggest scam in crawl space encapsulation services in Georgia. We're uncovering what homeowners are really paying for, what's often left out of the job entirely, and how to spot those warning signs before you spend a single dollar.
It's a huge issue down here.
It is. So we are looking at the actual engineering required to keep an indoor environment healthy. And our source material today comes from the operational blueprints, service guidelines, and technical protocols of a Metro Georgia-based company called Four Seasons Air Care, LLC.
They really map out the science of indoor air quality in these documents.
They do, and honestly, they're a lifesaver. Before we dive into their blueprints, I want to mention that this deep dive is sponsored by them, Four Seasons Air Care, LLC. You can reach them at 404-891-0225.
They've got fantastic 5-star reviews.
They really do. Four Seasons Air Care offers comprehensive air duct cleaning GA, crawl space encapsulation, ductwork installation and repair, dryer vent cleaning, disinfection services, HVAC system cleaning, and water damage restoration. So call the sponsor now. Crawl Space Encapsulation Services in Georgia, they're the ones you want.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the air we breathe inside, we have to start at the very bottom, right? The dirt under the house essentially dictates the baseline reality for the rest of the home's ecosystem.
It dictates the baseline because the foundation is literally where the house meets the earth. And in places like Georgia, we are usually talking about crawl spaces.
Right, the classic southern crawl space.
Exactly. And a crawl space with exposed soil in a climate where humidity frequently exceeds like 70%, it's essentially a structural incubator.
An incubator for what, exactly?
Well, the blueprints detail how that exposed earth is continuously off-gassing moisture, so it creates an environment with a permanently elevated dew point. It is basically the perfect biological breeding ground for mold, mildew, and wood-destroying organisms.
That sounds awful.
It's bad. But the technical challenge isn't just that microbial growth exists down there in the dark. The real structural flaw is how that subfloor air volume forcibly migrates up into the conditioned space where you are actually sleeping.
Right, and reading through the physics of that migration in the sources, it all basically comes down to the stack effect.
Yes, the stack effect is crucial to understand here.
I always thought of a house as a series of separate zones, But the stack effect treats the whole structure like a single column of moving pressure.
Precisely.
Because the air inside your living space is conditioned and buoyant. It naturally escapes through the upper levels. It leaks out through attic bypasses and upper windows.
Warm air rises. It's basic physics.
But nature abhors a vacuum. So when that air leaves the top of the house, it depressurizes the lower levels. It creates this negative pressure zone at the very bottom of the house.
Right.
So your home essentially acts like a massive mechanical straw, pulling replacement air up from the path of least resistance, which means it's actively sucking damp, soil gas-laden air straight up through the floor joists and into your living room 24 hours a day.
The physics of that pressure differential are just relentless. I mean, up to 50% of the air you breathe on the first floor of your home actually originated in your crawl space.
Wait, 50%. Half the air I'm breathing inside came from the dirt under my house.
Half of it. And the consequences aren't just respiratory, The Department of Energy data in the sources points out that uninsulated, unsealed crawl spaces account for massive energy loss.
Because your AC is fighting the humidity.
Exactly. Sealing them can reduce heating and cooling costs by up to 20%. But, and this is the big but, this is where the execution of that sealing process becomes incredibly technical.
And where the scams come in.
Yes, where a lot of standard contractor practices fall completely short and homeowners get ripped off.
I mean, I'm looking at the 5-step encapsulation protocol in these blueprints from Four Seasons Air Care, and it is a stark contrast to what you usually see from fly-by-night contractors.
Oh, completely different.
A lot of times you hear about people getting charged thousands of dollars and the contractor just unrolls some cheap 6 mil plastic from a hardware store over the dirt, tosses a fan down there, and calls it an encapsulation.
That is one of the most common scam-like practices in the industry. It is totally misleading.
But step 3 in this actual protocol demands an industrial 20 mil reinforced polyethylene vapor barrier. Is that thickness really necessary, or is that just engineering overkill to build a heavier tarp?
What's fascinating here is that the thickness isn't just about durability against someone crawling on it. It is about molecular density.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, standard 6 mil plastic, the cheap stuff, is highly permeable to soil gases over time, and it degrades super quickly in varied temperatures.
So it literally stops working.
Exactly. But a 20 mil reinforced polyethylene barrier, when it's mechanically fastened and properly sealed up the foundation walls, it actually stops the molecular transfer of moisture.
Okay, but the barrier is only step 3. You mentioned contractors skipping steps. What are the first 2?
Well, step 1 of true encapsulation requires advanced moisture mapping. The proper protocols specify using FLIR thermal imaging.
FLIR, like infrared cameras.
Yes, thermal cameras.
How does that map moisture better than a guy just shining a flashlight and looking for wet spots?
Because it reads temperature differentials caused by evaporative cooling.
Oh, I see.
If water is intruding through a porous cinder block foundation wall, it might not look visibly wet to the naked eye. But the FLIR camera detects the subtle drop in surface temperature where that microscopic evaporation is happening.
So they can see the moisture before it even pools up.
Right. It allows the technicians to pinpoint the exact hydrostatic pressure points before they even start the sanitization phase, which is step 2.
And step 2 is killing the mold, right?
Exactly. Applying EPA-approved antimicrobials to eliminate organic debris. A lot of the scam contractors just lay plastic over the mold. They don't sanitize anything.
That is disgusting. So they just trap the active mold under the plastic?
Or above it, and it just keeps growing.
Wow. So after the sanitization and the heavy vapor barrier goes down, step 4 is sealing the foundation vents entirely, which feels kind of counterintuitive at first, right? Because older building codes used to say crawl spaces needed to breathe through those open vents.
It was an old building philosophy that fundamentally failed in humid climates like Georgia.
Because of the outdoor air.
Exactly. If you open a vent to let a crawl space breathe in Georgia in July, you are just inviting 80-degree air with 75% humidity straight into a 65-degree crawl space.
Oh, that's just going to create condensation immediately.
The moisture hits its dew point instantly, condenses on the ductwork and the floor joists, and it literally rains inside the crawl space.
So sealing those vents cuts off the outside humidity entirely.
Yes. But that brings us to the 5th and most critical component of the engineering, which is the installation of a commercial-grade LGR dehumidifier.
Let's talk about the LGR, because I was
Yeah,
definitely wondering why you can't just plug in a regular residential dehumidifier from a big box store down there to save money.
Which is another massive red flag for a scam. If a contractor tries to sell you a standard $200 unit for a crawl space, run.
Good to know. So LGR stands for low grain refrigerant. What makes the physics of that machine so different?
A standard residential dehumidifier works by passing air over cold coils to condense the water.
Right.
But in a cool environment, like a sealed crawl space, a standard machine will quickly freeze up into a solid block of ice. Or it will just run continuously without actually dropping the humidity because the ambient air is already cool.
It just spins its wheels.
Exactly. An LGR, a low-grain refrigerant dehumidifier, uses a double cooling process. It pre-cools the incoming air before it ever hits the evaporator coils.
Oh, wow.
By dropping the air's temperature first, it lowers the dew point significantly. This allows the machine to pull massive amounts of water out of the air, even when the ambient temperature is down in the 50s.
So it's engineered to permanently maintain the relative humidity below 50% down there.
Yes. And keeping it below 50% alters the environment so drastically that mold simply cannot biologically function. It goes dormant or dies.
So the ROI on engineering the foundation correctly isn't just removing 99% of soil pollutants from the incoming air, it's actual structural integrity.
Without a doubt.
It prevents the floor joists from achieving the 20% moisture content required for wood rot. And by maintaining that dry environment, you are drastically lowering the workload on the house's primary respiratory system. Which brings us to the HVAC and the ductwork.
Right, the HVAC system is the lungs of the structure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because before we dive into how the HVAC gets choked by all this, I want to quickly remind you, the listener, to call the sponsor now. Crawl Space Encapsulation Services in Georgia. Reach out to Four Seasons Air Care at 404-891-0225.
Their 5-star reviews really speak for themselves when it comes to getting this stuff done correctly.
They really do. So the HVAC is the lungs. And its primary job, despite what most people think, is not actually cooling the air.
No, it is conditioning the air. The temperature drop is honestly just a byproduct of removing the humidity.
But when you look at the airflow dynamics, this is where the particulates from the living space collide with the mechanics of the machine.
Yes. And it's a messy collision.
Right, because the return ducts are constantly pulling in air from the living space. And in a place like Georgia, you have the massive April pollen peaks where literally everything turns yellow.
Oh, the pollen is inescapable.
You have pet dander, microscopic skin cells, and renovation debris. All of that organic matter gets pulled into the return ducts, and then it hits the dark, damp environment of the evaporator coils. The sources describe the result of that collision as biofilm.
Biofilm is essentially a matrix of microbial growth.
Sounds gross.
It is. When organic dust and dander meet the persistent condensation on the HVAC coils, the microbes excrete this slimy, glue-like substance to anchor themselves to the metal.
Like plaque on teeth.
Exactly like that. And in commercial engineering, this biofilm is recognized as a primary driver of sick building syndrome.
Where the building literally makes people ill.
Right. The conditioned air being cycled back into the workspace actually induces respiratory issues, chronic fatigue, and decreased productivity among the occupants.
And it isn't just an air quality issue either. It actively chokes the mechanical efficiency of the blower motor.
Oh, severely.
The protocols note that dirty ducts and coated coils increase static pressure. It acts like physical resistance in the system.
Yes, static pressure is the absolute enemy of HVAC longevity.
So the system has to use significantly more electrical energy just to force the conditioned air through that biofilm and debris. And the sources say that can reduce cooling efficiency by up to 20%.
Think about the physics of a fan pushing air through a clean, smooth metal tube versus a tube lined with friction-causing dust and sticky biofilm. The blower motor is going to run hotter, and it will draw way more amperage just to overcome that resistance.
But wait, looking at the EPA guidelines referenced in the sources, they explicitly state that duct cleaning is an as-needed service. I always assumed duct cleaning was just one of those routine maintenance chores you're supposed to schedule every single year.
A lot of people think that, but actually, the EPA explicitly pushes back against routine calendar cleaning.
Why is that?
Because airflow dynamics dictate that if a system is well sealed and properly filtered, the ducts shouldn't be accumulating heavy debris in the first place.
Makes sense.
The EPA recommends cleaning only when there is substantial visible mold, a vermin infestation, or excessive dust actively clogging the system and blowing into the occupied space.
So you don't just clean them for the sake of cleaning them.
Right. Because cleaning dirty ducts without addressing why they got dirty in the first place, like a leaky return plenum pulling air straight out of a dusty attic, or failing to manage the humidity from the crawl space, it's a totally futile exercise.
The ducts will just get contaminated again the next week.
Exact.
But when cleaning is actually necessary, the mechanical process outlined by NADCA, the National Air Duct Cleaners Association, is intense.
It's a major operation.
It's entirely based on source removal. You don't just, stick a shop vac into a vent register or spray a chemical sealant to glue the dust to the duct walls.
Spraying sealants over dirt is a temporary and often detrimental masking agent. True source removal requires putting the entire ductwork system under negative pressure.
How do they do that?
They connect high-powered negative air machines directly to the main trunk line. It basically turns the entire duct system into one massive vacuum.
But suction alone won't break the static friction of dust stuck to the walls.
Right. No, it won't. And that is where the mechanical agitation tools come in.
The blueprints detail the use of pneumatic air whips and rotary brushes. They snake these compressed air whips down the vent lines, and the whips physically beat against the interior walls of the ducts.
Right. Aggressively knocking the debris loose.
Breaking the structural bond of the biofilm and the caked-on dust, while that negative air machine simultaneously pulls everything backward and out of the house.
And crucially, the exhaust of that negative air machine must be HEPA filtered. This is non-negotiable in the technical standards.
I want to push on that for a second. We hear HEPA filter all the time in marketing. HEPA captures 99.97% of particles down to zero point 0.3 microns.
Correct.
Why zero point 0.3? Why is that specific microscopic size the ultimate benchmark for HEPA standards?
It has to do with particle physics, specifically something called Brownian motion.
Okay, physics time.
You might think smaller particles would be harder to catch, but they actually aren't. Extremely tiny particles smaller than zero point 0.3 microns, they bounce around randomly like pinballs in the air.
Oh, they don't just flow straight.
Right. This is Brownian motion. Because their path is so chaotic, they easily crash into the filter fibers and get trapped. On the other end of the spectrum, large particles travel in a straight line and get caught by simple impaction. They crash into the fibers because they are just too heavy to curve around them with the airstream.
So 0.3 microns is basically the sweet spot where they're too small for impaction, but too big for the chaotic Brownian bouncing.
Precisely. It is called the most penetrating particle size. Particles at exactly 0.3 microns are aerodynamic enough to ride the airflow curves right through standard filter gaps.
Wow.
So if a vacuum or an HVAC filter is proven to capture the 0.3 micron particles, it will mathematically capture virtually everything else, both larger and smaller.
That is fascinating, which naturally leads to the filtration on the HVAC unit itself. The EPA recommends MRV 13 to 16 filters for residential systems, which capture up to 95% of indoor particles.
They do.
But there's a massive catch to just going to the store and upgrading your filter, isn't there?
A huge catch. And it comes right back to static pressure.
Wow.
A MRV 16 filter is incredibly dense. It has to be woven tightly to capture those 0.3 micron particles. If you slide a highly restrictive MRV 16 filter into an older HVAC system that hasn't been balanced for it, you essentially suffocate the blower motor.
Like trying to breathe through a heavy winter blanket.
Exactly. The static pressure skyrockets. The system can't pull enough return air through that dense media, so the coils freeze over and the motor eventually just burns out completely.
So you can't just guess.
No. You can only deploy high-efficiency filtration if a diagnostic tool, like a digital manometer, verifies that your specific system can handle the restricted airflow without exceeding its operational static pressure limits.
It is wild how delicate that balance is. The humidity from the dirt affects the evaporator coils. The coils dictate the static pressure. The static pressure limits the filter density.
It's an entire ecosystem.
And whatever that filter cannot capture gets blown right back out into the living space, which leads us to the final resting place for all of this particulate matter. Because what goes up must eventually come down.
Gravity always wins.
Exactly. The dust, the dander, the pollen, the microscopic clay tracked in on shoes, it inevitably settles into the home's largest physical filter, the flooring, specifically carpets and rugs.
We largely view carpets through an aesthetic lens, for comfort and design, but functionally, within the ecosystem of the home, a carpet is a massive floor-level trap.
A trap for everything falling out of the air.
Yes. And just like the pleated filter in your HVAC unit, that floor trap eventually reaches its maximum holding capacity.
The sources break down the mechanics of this, and they point out that warm, humid environments actively alter the behavior of fabrics. It makes them hold on to organic odors way more stubbornly.
They lock onto them.
And everyday maintenance, like running a standard vacuum cleaner, is mathematically insufficient for the base of the carpet.
Vacuuming manages the top-level aesthetic, sure, but it lacks the suction velocity to remove the heavy abrasive grit that settles way down at the backing of the carpet.
That deeply embedded grit is highly abrasive, isn't it?
Oh, very. At a microscopic level, everyday foot traffic grinds that dirt against the synthetic fibers of the carpet like sandpaper.
Yikes.
It physically cuts and degrades the structural integrity of the yarn over time. This is why the Carpet and Rug Institute's technical standards dictate professional hot water extraction every 12 to 18 months.
So it's not just about looking clean.
No, it is an actual engineering requirement for material preservation, not just stain removal.
And the hot water extraction process they outline is intense. It is all about altering the chemistry of the dirt bonds.
They apply very specific pre-treatments based on the pH level of the soils.
Right. And then they inject scalding hot water at high pressure directly into the fibers to emulsify those deep soils. But the crucial part of that extraction machine is the vacuum lift, isn't it? Because if you leave that carpet saturated, you've just built a massive mold farm right over your subfloor.
Fast drying is absolutely imperative. The extraction equipment has to pull enough cubic feet of air per minute to recover the vast majority of that moisture immediately.
Otherwise, you're ruining the room.
Right. If the water penetrates and just sits in the carpet pad, it creates a localized high humidity event. It can off-gas moisture back into the room for days, completely defeating the purpose of the HVAC conditioning we just discussed.
But if the goal of all this engineering, the crawl space encapsulation, the MRV filters, the extraction is just to manage microscopic particles, I have to ask.
Go for it.
If the EPA recommends keeping a house so clean to manage these 0.3 micron particles, why wouldn't someone just rip out all their carpets and stick to hardwood floors? Wouldn't that solve the problem?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, removing the carpets fundamentally alters the aerodynamic physics of the room.
How so?
Well, hardwood floors are certainly easier to sanitize on the surface, but they offer zero trapping capacity.
They don't hold anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When particulate matter settles on a hard surface, the slightest disturbance, like a footstep, a door opening, even the draft from a ceiling fan, it immediately resuspends that dust right back into the air.
Oh, so the hard floor just lets the dust bounce back up.
Yes, the particles become airborne again and re-enter your breathing zone. Carpets, on the other hand, act as an intentional sink.
Like a sponge.
They actively grab and hold allergens, trapping them at floor level through static friction and gravity, which keeps them out of the air you breathe.
But like any sink, they must be emptied.
Exactly. If they aren't deep cleaned via hot water extraction, the filter essentially overflows.
Wow.
When the carpet fibers are totally saturated with embedded dust, everyday foot traffic starts launching those particles back into the air anyway.
And then they get pulled straight into the HVAC return vents.
Yep. They coat the coils in biofilm, they increase the static pressure, and the entire cycle of the home's ecosystem begins to fail all over again.
So what does this all mean? We started by talking about that comforting illusion of the static sealed box, the sanctuary we call home.
Right, that illusion of separation.
And looking at the operational blueprints of these systems, especially avoiding the scams out there, it is incredibly clear that a home is a highly dynamic, interconnected machine.
Very much so.
The crawl space operates as the foundational moisture regulator. The HVAC system acts as the respiratory engine, fighting static pressure to circulate and condition the air. And the flooring acts as the final environmental sink, trapping what the filters miss.
You cannot modify or neglect one component without fundamentally shifting the physics of the others.
This raises an important question regarding our operational approach to the buildings we inhabit. Do we passively wait for the system to fail? Waiting for the air to smell musty, or for the ductwork to choke on biofilm, or for the floors to sag and then react?
Or do we treat the home as an engineered environment that requires proactive diagnostic maintenance to keep the occupants healthy?
Because the physics of the building dictate that the reactive approach will invariably be more destructive and honestly a lot more expensive.
Always.
It is a delicate balance of pressures, moisture, and filtration. And it leaves you with a final, slightly unsettling thought to mull over.
What's that?
We invest immense amounts of time and capital into weather stripping, insulating, and closing off our homes to protect ourselves from the outside elements.
Right.
But if our homes are constantly pulling air from the dirt below, trapping particulates in the synthetic fibers below our feet, and cycling organic matter through dark metal ducts, how much of the outdoors are we actually trapping inside with us?
That's a great point.
At what point does our highly insulated, climate-controlled sanctuary stop being a shelter and become a more densely concentrated version of the very environment we are trying to escape?
It's something to think about.
Keep that in mind the next time you walk through your front door, shut it behind you, and take a deep breath.